Hey, good afternoon, everybody. If it's Monday at 12 noon Pacific, you know it's got to be Content Chat. Today, we are here live on LinkedIn with somebody who might look a little bit familiar to those of you who are regulars at the Content Marketing World and around the Content Marketing Institute pages. We have Kim Moutsos here to chat with us about the most recent career and salary outlook survey. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm really glad to be here, Erica. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Before we dive into the research, though, I'd love it if you could share with folks what you do at CMI and, kind of what got you into all of this kind of good, fun content marketing stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love hearing people's origin stories in content marketing.
Right.
I lead a team of writers and editors, a small team at the Content Marketing Institute. We're responsible for the daily content that you see on our website. We do publish an article every weekday at contentmarketinginstitute.com. We also have an executive publication called CCO, Chief Content Officer, that is monthly now. It's been different periods throughout the course of its 10 plus years of publishing.
Amazing.
And we, handle the website on the website content and the daily newsletter and weekly newsletters that we send out. So if you are a subscriber to our daily newsletter, you see a note from me every single day and a picture of me, which, not wearing my glasses, but hopefully you can recognize me because let's be honest, it's not the world's newest picture of me. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, especially, in these COVID related times, I mean, I think a lot of folks got, pictures got outdated because we weren't going to conferences in person and getting, the obligatory LinkedIn headshot every year.
That's exactly right. And, sometimes the older pictures are just more flattering to us, right?
Fair.
At least for me. I'm speaking only for myself.
I think that most of us resemble that remark. So
okay, great. Is that a Mythbusters reference? I don't know. I'm sure it's been done many times. So you asked me about my origin story in content marketing.
Yes.
And I, like you, have a journalism background. I got a master's in journalism, but I didn't actually ever work directly in pure journalism. I got my start writing and editing in magazines for associations many hundreds of years ago. And then when I moved to the West Coast, San Francisco area, where I still live, I started working for a publisher that had a lot of tech publications. And I was a writer and editor for some custom magazines for IBM, Dell, SAP. So very, we called it custom publishing at the time. And from there, I did a lot of custom publishing work for a variety of tech publishers, left for a little while to go and do some in-house content work at a startup company. I guess they weren't really a startup. They'd been around for 10 years, but a growing small business. And then I came back to Informa to CMI to work with Stephanie Stahl, who I had worked with earlier in my career. And because CMI, is such a great resource for people who do, what we call now content marketing, content in marketing. And, it just was such a great opportunity. So I'm thrilled to be working with this wonderful community and with the really knowledgeable experts on staff at CMI, and then people like you who, come to our events and speak and bring together wonderful communities of people to learn from and learn alongside of in the content marketing journey.
It's so cool to hear your journey. And I just realized from what you're talking about, we have another thing in common, which is I worked for the Northern California Human Resources Association, and I was started out as their publications editor and doing membership marketing, and it really grew. And so I too have had my share of time editing for association pubs. I just love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I loved it too. And in a way, it's kind of similar to, what we both do now in terms of working with communities of people, because in associations, you literally have a community, right? And everybody's learning together and growing together and sharing ideas. So it's nice to be doing that again, even though it's not officially an association in the same way. This has been a really great community to learn and grow and work with.
That's awesome. Well, and I think that the unique community that the Content Marketing Institute put together is why you're able to field all of the different types of research you do, because people get
Definitely.
so much from the community that they're happy to give back their data and their insights and, what's really stressing them out in a way that they wouldn't with some, random company calling them up and saying, "Hey, can we get a few minutes of your time for a survey?"
Yeah. Yeah, I
Because I
think
really,
that's true.
you're not the only people that do obviously marketing related research, but the breadth of your research and the things that people share with you are really, really different. And what I thought was fascinating, of course, about this year, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, is that AI popped up its
Mhm.
little generative content head and said, "Hi, I'm here. Please be
Yeah.
afraid." And so I think that's probably the best place for us to start is just talk about, from the research, how are we seeing content marketers using AI in their workflows? Because there's, it feels like there's multiple camps of the AI is evil people to the AI can do content creation and everything in between. So what does the survey say?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and, I'm just gonna vamp for a second because even though I told you I was gonna pull up my notes that I set aside when we were first talking, I didn't do it, but now I have them back, and forgive me for looking at this document, but I wanna make sure to give you the numbers correctly here, because they're really interesting, as you said. One thing we learned is that pretty much almost everyone is giving AI a try in some way or another. 3 out of 4 people told us they are using it, even just to experiment. But let me give you some specifics on exactly how they're using it. Um, 47%, and this was kind of the top number, said that they are using AI to brainstorm new topics. So we don't know exactly how they're doing that, but maybe they're going to say Chat GPT, though that's not the only option, to say, for my audience of X, what are the hot topics around XYZ? Another 46% told us they use it to research headlines and keywords. I do that myself. I definitely have a few AI tools that I go in and I try out different headlines and I see the scores they give me. Of course, I then evaluate it against my own judgment and
Yeah.
experience, but I think that's not an uncommon way to use AI. Only 36% said they're using it right now to use drafts. And this one surprised me more. Only 29% say they use it to proofread. I use
I thought
Grammarly.
everybody uses
Right?
Grammarly.
Yes. I mean, I don't accept everything Grammarly says, but I definitely
No.
use it, so I was really surprised by that. Another 25% say they use it to create outlines for assignments, and only 25% say they don't use it at all. And I'm actually a little skeptical about that number because let's be honest, people are curious. Does that mean they don't use the output of AI in their work? I'd just be really shocked if there's anyone working in our field who hasn't at least gone over to peek at, let's say, Chat GPT or something AI related. So that number surprised me a little, but it is only 25%. So,
And you
most
have to
people
wonder
are.
too, Kim, if some people just don't understand that AI is in some of the tools that they're using.
Yeah.
Because, like, for instance, I know so many people have used the CoSchedule headline analyzer,
Mhm.
and if
Yes.
you ask them, "Do you use AI to, help you with your headlines?" They might answer no, not even
Yeah.
realizing that it's AI.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's really probably where some of the people who say they aren't using it might be mistaken. They just don't realize that it's built into the tools. So, when we ask the question, they may have thought, "Are we asking? Do you specifically use Chat GPT or something that is more sort of headline grabbing?" Yeah, but interesting results. I mean, I'd say really pretty much everyone is at least trying it out to see, what they can do with it. And I think that's where people should be. I mean, you've got to know what's out there in order to know if it's something that could help you.
100%, because I mean, when was the last time you met a content marketer who said, "Wow, we have so much extra time and we're so bored at work because it's so easy to get all of our work done well before deadlines," right?
I have never met that person.
I haven't either. So, I personally, I think AI can be so helpful for workflows, for personalization,
Mhm.
and one of my favorites for really ensuring you have that unified brand voice across everything that comes out of your organization. But I recognize that my, sentiment isn't necessarily how everyone feels. So I'd love it if you could share some of the fears that content marketers shared about how AI could change the face of content marketing for the future.
Yeah, I think when we started the research, um, we expected to hear that people were worried about their jobs, right? That they'd be flat out replaced by AI tools. And we did hear that. About 45% of the content marketers who responded to the survey said they worry that there will be fewer jobs for content marketers. But that was actually number 4 on the list of concerns. It wasn't the top concern at all. The top worry, and this was cited by or listed as the top concern by 62% of people, was that there will be less respect for skilled writers and editors. And I think that makes sense because if you hear people saying, oh, just have AI write it, I mean, you can understand why, people worry that their jobs will be devalued. Um, Another 55% said they worry that writing and editing will be viewed as a commodity going forward. And logically, that means 46% worry that AI will lead to lower compensation for writers and editors. Then the 45% who said fewer jobs for content marketers is a concern. Way, way, way down the list. 17% they worry that it would be a larger workload for writers and editors. And only 17% said they're not worried at all about AI related impacts. So I think, those are the numbers. And I think if I can, I'll share a couple of the verbatim comments people gave us.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Um, One person said, I'm very worried. I think our work is already undervalued and AI will probably only make it worse. Another person said agencies will start laying off human experts if they see that AI tools can cut the workload in half. And another person said, I'm scared that less honest writers will benefit from using AI and stealing from other writers. So there are, really a big range of concerns, and many of them are understandable. I mean, they're all understandable. People feel how they feel. And it'll be interesting to see how things go forward. I do think the person who said agencies will start laying off human experts if they see that AI tools can cut the workload in half. I mean, I think that's a big if because, as you said, there are lots of different ways to use AI, but using it to write anyway isn't necessarily going to be faster, better, or produce better results. So we're just going to see where that takes us.
Totally. And having spent some time working in an agency, to me, what I could see happening is instead of having an intern or an associate who just
Mhm.
graduated from college spending 8 hours doing research, and this was an example that Christopher Penn, I think it was, just gave, instead of having that person do that and then, send a rough draft over to the next person up the food chain who does a heavy edit on it, and then next person up on the food chain who then does a proofread before handing it to the client, you could have, you could have the account executive do the initial research, have, do a quick draft, and then use AI to do a proofread before sending over that first draft to a client. So,
Mhm.
yeah, you would save hours, which means then you can't be billing just by
Yeah.
hours. You have to be billing for here's what a press release costs, here's what a feature article costs. You have to really, maybe rethink your pricing model,
Mhm.
which may mean, yes, you need less, fewer people to do some of that work. But on the flip side of that, agency workers are typically way stressed out and
Yeah.
overworked with too much going on. So maybe it just means they won't have to be having 100% of their time billable when they're in those entry level positions so they can have more time to be mentored and to learn. So
Yeah.
sometimes
Wouldn't
the
that
things
be a
that feel
great outcome?
bad, can work out,
Yeah, yeah. That would be an ideal outcome for sure.
right?
Yes.
So it will definitely be interesting to see kind of where we go with all of that. But this is not just all about AI, but I wanted to get that out there because I know that was, that was definitely where I saw so much of the conversation because people are really trying to figure out how AI can either, help their career or how it can, how it's going to change it. And all I
Mhm.
can say is if somebody's trying to sell you, your 1 year's worth of content generated by AI for $29.99, don't buy it. It's not going to be something that you should be using. It's not
I
going to
agree.
be good.
I definitely agree.
Because that was a real ad that I saw surfed up
Wow.
recently, and I was like, why no, thank you.
Yeah.
So, let's start talking a little bit about the salary information. What were some of the highlights that you thought were, particularly of interest when it comes to salary trends?
Yeah, so I'm happy to give some highlights, but I definitely recommend that if you can and you don't mind, going to register for this, download the full report because these numbers are very nuanced. We looked at salary by a number of dimensions: location, role, meaning are you a manager? Are you a director? Are you an individual contributor? Gender, generation. We looked at Gen Z all the way up to baby boomers. And the numbers really change a lot based on all of those factors. So I just want to say that before I give the averages, because, average is just an average and it doesn't give you that much information.
And thank you for
Um,
including Gen X in your chart because we get really tired of not being included in charts.
Yes, yes, Gen X is definitely in there. A lot of Gen Xers on the CMI team, so we won't be leaving Gen X out anytime soon. Um, okay, so first of all, let me just say, if you saw the newsletter today from CMI, you already know this number because I wrote about it. Today's newsletter was about pay transparency, which is another but related issue. But you'll know 54% of content marketers feel they should be paid more for their work. So I just want to put that out there. It's kind of a glass half full, half empty situation, right? About half of people feel they're paid fairly, and about half of people feel they should be paid more. So um, make of that what you will, I guess. Um, so how much do people make? On average, content marketers make about $112,000. As I hinted, the average doesn't really tell the whole story. So, one thing you'll find out if you download the report and look at the specific numbers: people in large urban markets, the San Francisco area where Eric and I both are, New York, Boston, et cetera, people in those large urban areas make about 20%, 26% more on average than people outside those areas. Makes sense, right? Cost of living is so much higher. That probably accounts for a good chunk of that. Cost of living may not be 26% higher, though it feels like it is, I think. Then obviously, Gen X and baby boomers definitely make more than millennials and Gen Z, which makes sense because, again, they've been in the workforce longer and presumably have more experience or have risen to a higher level. And then the really big thing that makes a difference is that director level and above positions pay quite a bit more compared to managers and individual contributors. And all those numbers are in the report. Nothing too surprising there. But there's a big swing. So that $112,000 number on average doesn't give you enough information to benchmark your own salary or the salaries of the people on staff. So make sure you look a little more closely at the numbers if you want to use them in that way.
Totally. And what's really great is in California, now you have to have pay ranges
Yeah.
available on job listings if you're promoting them online. So we're no longer in the situation we used to be where you have no idea what that, job that's, the equivalent of yours can be hired for. So, while now we actually have so much more transparency than I think a lot of us were used to because we'd have to kind of surreptitiously share that information, or your boss would be applying for a home mortgage loan and leave her application with all of her pertinent information and tax returns on the fax machine, and you'd see it and be like, oh really?
Not that that ever happened to
Not
you.
that that ever happened to me.
No, well, actually, the reason we wrote about paid transparency today is that yesterday New York joined California and many other states with their pay transparency law going into effect. So I think I saw a statistic from Indeed that said because of these pay transparency laws, most of their job descriptions now do have a pay range associated with the listing, even though not every state requires it. So you can see how that pressure of the big states moving that direction has made that a more common practice for people. And I think it does help with negotiations and in terms of moving jobs, but then in your own position too. And we can talk about this a little bit more as we get into that part. Just knowing, if you want to raise, knowing what the benchmark is for people in your position can be very helpful when you put together your business case. You also know then what to ask for or what might be reasonable. Um,
Right. And of course, if you're hiring, putting that out there means you're not going to get people who, have a salary expectation that exceed your budget. You'll still get a few of
exactly.
those people who think that once you meet them, you'll somehow be able to find money buried somewhere.
Right.
But in general, it means that you won't have to wade through as many candidates that you don't have any chance of actually being able to hire, or folks that are looking for an offer in order to negotiate a better salary at their existing job.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So one of the other things that I know really has been top of mind when it comes to career topics, because literally everyone that we've talked to this year, we've talked about this, with the recessions that have been happening, with all of the layoffs. I have some friends who have, unfortunately been laid off twice this year because it's
Oh,
that kind of a year. Um, what are leaders doing, or what can they do in order to try to help relieve the burnout and stress that those, the survivors, the folks who are still employed have? Because, having in a previous, life of being an in-house person, I
mhm,
survived, 3 years of turmoil where there's lots of layoffs, and you end up having a job that was nothing like the job you accepted.
mhm.
It's just sort of like little bits and pieces of all the jobs for the people who left. So it can certainly be overwhelming for folks.
Yeah, I really want to point you to this article, and I should have given you the link ahead of time, but I'll make sure you have it to share with your community. Um, uh, it's an article in our CCO publication called "When Content Marketers Are Not Okay." And this article is by Chris Gillespie, who runs a content studio called Fenwick here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And Chris and his team had just run into so many of the exact stories that you mentioned of people, just feeling their staff feeling burnout themselves. He felt like he really needed to put together an article about this. So he actually wrote two for us, one for managers, from a manager's perspective, what can you do to help your team? And one from the perspective of the individual contributor who is experiencing that burnout from work. So I'll make sure to give you both of those articles.
Awesome. We'll
Um,
include them in the recap. That'll be great.
yeah, they're so moving, and they're really, I think it's a really important discussion. And I think you can guess the kinds of things people want to be treated as humans, right? They
Yeah.
want to have a rapport with their boss, with their manager. They want to feel safe expressing frustration when they need to. And they're tired. So Chris's recommendations for managers include things like, provide that safe outlet for expressing frustration, shield people to the extent that you can from the tinier details of when change comes up, and then make sure they have what they need to cope with that change. Don't micromanage. Don't force extra processes for process sake, and cultivate really trust and autonomy on your team. And again, I think I will get you this link because I do think it's so important to read this article. Um, but the main things are people want to work in an engaging environment where they feel a sense of camaraderie and trust. And in fact, we did ask people what makes them feel engaged at work, and that
Mhm.
is, part of being able to deal with stress has to do with your enjoyment and your sense of reward from actually doing the work. So when we asked people, what makes them feel engaged, 81% said doing meaningful work. So I think that translates into making sure that people understand the bigger picture of everything you're asking them to do, how their part fits into the whole, and then what the whole does for your customers, for the like your why, right? Why is this company even doing this? And I hope your why is more than to make money for our shareholders. But yeah, exactly. Um, but along the way, what you might be doing, to help the people who turn to you for help and advice. The second thing people really are looking for are meaningful are coworker relationships. And we hear all the time how important is your relationship is with your manager. That came up as the fourth most important thing on the list of things that make people feel engaged. So important, 58% said that is important. But I thought it was interesting to note that coworker relationships were mentioned by 78% of the people who answered this question. So I really think that sort of building a healthy, thriving team culture can go a long way, knowing that you're in it with other people who care about you, care about the work, and want to do their best with what they have is important. Of course, everyone wants to be recognized. 71% say that's very important to them in terms of feeling engaged at work. The manager relationship, as I mentioned, was mentioned by 58% of people, and then a sense of belonging by 56% of people. And finally, and this ties into what we were talking about before with AI and various other tech developments. 55% say they want professional development opportunities at work, and I think that is a place where if people's concerns are about what will happen when AI is integrated more systematically throughout our organization, helping them understand what their opportunities are to skill up in AI or in other areas, can go a long way to alleviate their concerns, especially if you've made them feel like a valued player on the team. Um, so I went on a little bit about that, but I'll make sure to give you the links to those two articles by Chris that I mentioned, and I hope everyone will take a minute to read them.
Fantastic. And I would just add there that, when you invest in somebody by investing in their career growth, they're so much more likely to stay.
Yeah,
And of course, there's the old saying, where the executive says, "Oh, but what if we spend all this money and then they leave?" It's like, what if you don't spend the money and they
and
leave?
they leave, exactly, right. Yeah,
You
that's a
know?
really good point, yes.
It's like, because if you're showing them that you care, they're gonna be so much less likely to jump ship for another job just because it pays a little bit more money, unless, of course, they have some sort of a life situation where they need a bunch of money, for a personal reason that they're not sharing with you. But usually the money isn't why they're quitting.
Right,
Um, so why are they quitting? Especially
truly.
in this environment where it seems so scary,
Yeah.
to be hopping out there when we're having layoffs and, recession and all that kind of good stuff.
So we didn't ask the question in exactly that way. So I don't know for sure. Our
Mhm.
research doesn't tell us exactly why people are quitting, but we did ask them what they would look for in a new position, and you can maybe extrapolate from there. I don't think it's like a one-to-one, right? Because it doesn't
Right.
tell us what would drive someone to leave the job they're in today. But I do think what we just talked about before in terms of feeling engaged is probably a good place to look for hints as well.
Yeah.
Um, so, what people told us that they're looking for in a new position, and we looked at this, we separated men and women to see whether there were any differences in how they would answer the question. For both men and for women, the number one thing people said they would look for in a new position is a higher compensation package. So, I mean, I think that doesn't necessarily mean that people are leaving their jobs in order to get more money, but if they are going to leave the job they know, then they certainly expect a higher compensation package
Yeah.
than they were experiencing before. But the second most important factor they were looking for in a new position, and I think this talks a little bit to what you were saying too, someone might have a life situation where they really need either more money or, as number two on our list, is flexible working hours or location. I mean, I think that's for everyone, as we've seen in the pandemic, companies realized, hey, people can work from anywhere. Now there seems to be a bit of a backlash in some areas, but people know now it can work, and it works really well for everyone, I think, because I've been a remote worker
Same.
for a long, long time. I know for new employees, it may not be always be ideal in the beginning, but we know this is something people want because they told us on this survey. The other thing that they would look for, and here there's a little bit of a variation between how men answered this question and women. The number three important thing on their list for women was a cultural fit and a team with shared values. For men, it was meaningful work. That shows up for women too, down at number 5. Cultural fit comes in number 5 for men, which is kind of an interesting little bit of a contrast. Um, for both men and women, growth opportunity came in at number 4. So yes, people do want more money, but they also want a flexible working hours and location. All the things that they value in feeling engaged at work are things that they would look for in a new job. So I think if you're worried about people jumping ship from your team, take a look at those engagement numbers and the things that people say they really value about their work. Doing meaningful work, having good relationships with coworkers, being recognized, and having a sense of belonging can go a long, long, long way. Then pay them fairly.
Definitely.
And then you should be in good shape.
And what I think is interesting, because one of my clients works, they create basically future of work kind of software. So the tools that really help people collaborate at a distance with the same level of engagement as if you were sitting in a room with someone. And so I've spent a lot of time reading all about these things. And what is fascinating to me is just seeing how now the company, like all hands retreat kind of thing, is changing. Because having been to a number of those over the years, they used to be basically you fly someplace where you
Mhm.
get crammed in a house frequently, where you're sharing a room with people that you don't necessarily know that well, so a little uncomfortable, a little weird, and then you end up then spending most of the day sitting in conference rooms
Mhm.
having meetings. You're talking about strategy and stuff, but you're mostly doing work, and then
Mhm.
you have some sort of mandated fun activity that involves alcohol, where everyone has to go out and socialize, but in a very regimented manner. And then, another day of stuff to get done, and then you fly home. And it's hard because the idea there was that, oh, this will bring the team closer together. And it's like through
Mhm.
shared hardship. I
Mhm.
mean, it's weird when when you're having an offsite with your leadership team and you're booked into a room that has a sofa and a bed, and it's 3 of you ladies, and you're like, "Well, okay, let's just draw straws, do Rochambeau to decide who's
Yeah.
sleeping with which stranger?" Weird, right? These are
Yeah.
real things that happen, and it doesn't bring people together other than, making snarky comments maybe. But what I'm seeing now is we're actually seeing companies use these kinds of all hands and retreats as, putting together an agenda where, yes, there'll be some meetings if there's some work that could really value having everyone together face to face working on something, but they have a menu of, activities that the company will pay for that you can choose which one you want to do. And you can hang out with your colleagues, and you have free time to explore the interesting location that the team has picked. And you have lots of dinners and, really mindful activities to really get to know people. So that way, even though you have a distributed team, that you're getting to know each other as human beings. And that to me is just so valuable and such a great investment.
Yeah, I think, one thing I'm picking up on as a theme in our conversation is flexibility and,
Mhm.
offering, uh, a set of options for people that help them feel included in the way they want to be included. As you mentioned, not everyone wants to hang out in a bar. Not everyone wants to do axe throwing or whatever the, team trust or team
Yeah,
building activity of the moment might be. But there are other ways, that you can give people choices and options around how they do connect together.
exactly. And I will just say that the most recent offsite like this I was invited to was a client's offsite. And during one of those afternoons where we had some free time, a bunch of us went to a record store, a used record store together. And I'm like, this is not the kind of thing that would have happened on any other all hands or leadership retreat I've ever been to. And it was amazing because
Yeah,
what you learn about people you've worked with when you go into a used record store is amazing. That's all I'm
yeah,
gonna say.
that's very cool.
It was so
Kudos
much
to whoever
fun.
planned that activity.
And I wasn't the one who suggested it, but let me tell you that the moment it was suggested, I was like, "Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Let's all go." Well, let me see. I think we've gotten through all of my questions that I had prepared. So we will open things up to folks who are listening live or who are participating on Twitter because we are live streaming this on Twitter as well. I'm sorry, the platform formerly known as
Yes,
Twitter. I just feel weird calling it X.
X, yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry, because when I grew up in college where X was a party drug, X is not a
Oh,
communication platform, so I'm having a hard time with it. So Twitter,
oh,
whatever. We
you
will,
were way cooler than I was because I thinking of it as X marks the spot, X Factor, extreme games, didn't even occur to me, so
whoops, yeah, well, I went to school in Southern California, and it had a
okay.
really, um there was a really active rave scene when I was in
Mm,
college, so yeah. I guess I just sort of overshared. It sometimes happens.
that's what makes these chats exciting.
I think so too. We'll give it a couple minutes to see if folks have any questions, but, when you kind of, like, think about the research as a whole, was there anything that particularly surprised you personally that, either something that was really, different from last year or just something that you hadn't necessarily thought of that kind of popped out for you? Because when you spend a lot of time with data, there is always something that makes you go, "Huh."
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because one popped up very pretty late in our sort of analysis and packaging of the findings, and it was that here. Let me see if I can pull this up so I give you the numbers correctly.
Okay.
When we asked people what they're planning to add to their skill set, um, we noticed a really big drop in the number of people who are planning to, and I'm having trouble finding it, who are planning to invest in skills around writing and editing, like half. What the numbers were about half or nearly half what they were the previous year. So the first year that we did this study, X number of people said, they want to brush up on their writing and editing skills and really invest in becoming better writers and editors, communicators. And this year, that number plummeted. So, in the framework of everything that we've talked about today, I think you can understand why people are worried that they will be investing in skills that won't be valued and won't help them get ahead in their career. Um, but I think that's concerning. I mean,
Because
maybe
it's
they feel
self-fulfilling
super
prophecy,
confident.
right?
Yes,
If we're not
that's
working on
exactly
becoming better writers every single day and making time for that and investing in it, then the robots will take our jobs because they'll get better because they're working on it every day.
yes, that's right. So I would say that is definitely the thing, and let me see if I can get that number for you because I think it is interesting to look at what people said they do wanna invest in terms of, careers. I know one of them, of course, I think the number one was that they wanted to, learn more about they wanted to invest in technology skills. Yes. Okay. So here I found the numbers.
Awesome.
Um, we when we asked people what they wanted to focus on in terms of upskilling, the number one answer was working with new technology. And the options that we gave them or examples were things like AI, but not only AI,
Mhm.
CMS, DAM, CRM, any kind of technology. The second most cited skill that people are planning to invest in, and this makes sense too, data analytics and data science. I think, as you know, and you've probably experienced in your own business, being able to, really parse the numbers to see where you're getting your best return is pretty important. And we know companies value that. 42% said they want to invest in leadership and management skills. And way down on the list, next to the last, only 22% said they want to invest in their writing and editing skills. And the previous year, I don't have that number on hand, but it was quite a bit higher. As I said before, almost double. Um, so yeah, I'd say that's probably one of the most surprising things that we found in the survey, and troubling, um, for all the reasons that you mentioned,
Yeah.
self-fulfilling prophecy. And, I think even if people do feel like, okay, I'm invested in writing and editing, I've got my skills up to a certain level. I think all of us who work as writers and editors know that um, there's not ever, at least for me, there's not ever a point where you feel like, I've got that mastered. I don't need to get better. It's one of those things where expectations change, every project is different, styles change, your brand voice might change, or you switch jobs and have to learn a new
Yeah.
brand voice. And there's always something to learn. There's always a way to improve your skills, brush up, study someone else who's great and figure out, how can I become great in my own way? Um, so yeah, that's probably the most surprising and the most concerning thing that we uncovered in the research this year. How about you? Can I turn that back around on you? I know that you read the research and looked at it quite a bit. What surprised you?
For me, again, it was looking at that stat about writing because I can't think of any CMO I've ever worked for or any client that I've had that has ever said to me, "Oh, the writing on our team is amazing. We don't need you to do any writing, Erica." That has happened absolutely 0 times in my life.
Right.
0 times. Inevitably, no matter what it was that I was brought in to work on, I end up being asked to do all sorts of completely different things,
Mm,
because they inevitably are having a struggle with either doing like web copy that really reflects the brand voice and the brand values. I've done so much of that kind of
mhm.
stuff when there have been rebrands where they've just felt like we don't have anyone in house who's going to be able to apply our new brand voice to our content and to be able to really re-envision this. And that is really troubling to me because if you have a content team and you have product marketing, and you have PR, that is 3 teams that someone on
Yeah.
that team should be able to at least write a messy first draft, and that that the leadership doesn't feel like any of those people can even take a stab at it. That is really, really worrying. And then similarly, I do a ton of executive ghostwriting, which, makes sense because journalism, magazine journalism background, what did you do? You interviewed people and then you quoted them. So it's basically the same thing, only you take yourself out of the article. So for me, I've done a ton of that over the last 20 something years. And I kind of felt like eventually that would be the kind of thing that the in-house comms team, the in-house PR team would own. But it's increasingly become something that they do outsource, even though the people who have the best feel for what an executive's voice is are those comms people who work with them all the time, who get
Mhm.
FaceTime with them. But they seem to, of course, they're busy. So I get that. But you frequently don't even get tidbits. You don't get
Mhm.
any kind of insights from them before you go into those intake calls with the executives to talk about the topic. And that for me is really, really surprising. But it just, it shows that people are not working to hone those skills, even though I think it's really necessary if you want to be promoted, if you want to be the head of comms, if you want to have that strategic leadership position, you can't just focus on the strategy. You have to also
Mhm.
focus on being a flawless communicator, which means being a great writer.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And I think that people undervalue not necessarily the skill of writing, because I think sometimes people are intimidated by writing and they think, oh, I'm not a writer, so we have to hire a writer to do
Yep.
this. But what they do underestimate is how much writing is involved in everything a business does. There's almost nothing that doesn't require writing of some sort. Um, I can't think of, even writing an email, right? Of
Yeah.
course, just writing and editing skills are important in really nearly every job, and not just on the content team. And I've had people say to me, "Oh, well, as organizations move to video, if you do this by video, you don't need a writer." And I was like, "Well, who's writing the script for the video?" Yes, there's writing and video. They're not two different things. I mean, there's skills that are applied differently. Yes, the thing will ultimately be filmed and told in a slightly different way, but you still need a writer unless
It's
you're
still
just
scripted. I
ad-libbing.
wrote a video script on Friday.
Yeah. I wrote a script for this conversation. I mean, like there's writing and everything. I mean, yes, we sat here and chat, but I wrote it first because I knew that, I wanted to make sure that people understood the numbers behind what we're
Yeah,
talking about today. So that involves looking at information, summarizing it, and all of that is writing. I really do think that that is a place where people get into trouble when they don't realize how much of the work that needs to be done does involve writing and its adjuncts, throughout the whole organization.
totally. Because like right now, one of the biggest both opportunities and threats to marketing organizations is your ability to provide that truly personalized
Mhm.
one-to-one experience throughout the entire customer relationship through all the touch points. And the thing is that yes, you might use AI to parse all of your data to understand
Mhm.
what is the right next step with a customer or with a prospect, but there's a human being that has to create that content that's being served up to them, who has to write that ideal script that the customer service person is having,
Mhm.
that is using to have the conversation with them, or to write that copy that goes into your email client that's able to send out the versions that meet the specifications for the person there. But there still is a writer involved. There's still a person who understands the customer experience and how that then comes across in writing.
Yeah,
um,
it's really
it's
true.
not going to just all be done automatically by the AI,
I
and if
love
it
how
is, it's
it
not
is
going to
all
work.
magically so true. The cat just really captures that sort of idea that, "Oh, just have AI do it. It's magic. It's done." Yeah, it never works that way.
No, because if it's gonna be truly
Mhm.
personalized, you're gonna have to spend a ton of time training the AI for them to even understand what, what that particular person with all these variables, what they should, how you would then communicate with them differently. It's not gonna make sense for a very long time to do
No,
it that
it's
way.
very true. Very true.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions teed up, but I am so excited that we'll be able to share the research, and we'll share the links to those two great articles that you mentioned. And hopefully, this will give some folks some food for thought, whether they are looking for a new job in the new year, or to get a raise, or that they're thinking about growing their own content team intentionally. This should hopefully help them think through how to do things a little bit differently. Because if they don't, then they might not land those amazing content marketers, because there's so many interesting options for us all out there in this distributed workforce, which you and I are so happy to be a part of. We're working, we're in our home offices, and we're happy, and we're working, and that means that we have a huge opportunity. And I think increasingly content marketers are going to be, yes, they might be working in house, but that doesn't mean that they're working in company owned real estate. So,
No, that's right. I think that's less and less common, at least, you know, yeah, at least among the content folks that I know, it's still pretty accepted to have a distributed and remote workforce. And we'll see if that changes. But I think this is the kind of work that works well in that structure, and I'd be really surprised if we ever go back to offices only.
yeah,
I mean, it limits your talent pool for one thing to just whoever lives within driving distance of your office. And
and has the willingness to drive to get
yes,
there.
yes, and I say driving distance, but of course public transportation. But yes, the commute and the willingness to
Yeah.
commute. And I think that's becoming, people don't like it. It's a waste of time. But
It is. And if your destination is a long table where you're going to be shoulder to shoulder with your colleagues and have to wear huge noise canceling headphones on your head to try to get any work done, but you're still going to be constantly interrupted, that is not how you create amazing content.
yeah,
That is how you drive somebody nuts.
yes, definitely.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all of the results. If folks want to hear more from you, where are the best places to find you? What channels are you on, and where can they learn more?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Kim Moutsos. I'm the only Kim Moutsos, I'm pretty sure, on LinkedIn.
Oh, that's amazing and awesome.
I'm on Twitter, but I don't spend a lot of time there, and I pretty much only lurk on Instagram. So find me on LinkedIn or come to contentmarketinginstitute.com and sign up for our daily newsletter, and you'll hear from me every day. If that's too much for you, you can also easily find a way to get in touch with me through the website. But I'd be happy to hear from you. And this has been a really great conversation, and I appreciate you having me on, Erica.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
I'm glad to do it.
Everybody, if you have questions after the fact, you can always leave them on the YouTube page or on the recap article on ericahill.com, and I will be happy to pass along to Kim to answer. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye.